We often think of surrealism as a Parisian salon movement of anarchic art, but by the 1940s, its hallucinatory grammar had quietly seeped into popular culture. World War II left Europe shattered and its avant-garde emigres scattering to New York and Hollywood. In that charged atmosphere, dreams and nightmares became a common currency on screen. Filmmakers who had cut their teeth on avant-garde techniques began welding them to genre cinema. In this chapter, we trace how figures from Maya Deren to Jean Cocteau and Alfred Hitchcock brought the uncanny into American and French films, and how mainstream noir, melodrama, and thrillers absorbed surrealist symbolism. We'll see how subconscious imaginary became a hidden language of post-war movies, bringing avant-garde rebellion with classic Hollywood spectacle. Let's start with Maya Deren and American experimental cinema, shall we? Maya Deren's Mashes of the Afternoon in 1943 helped push surrealism and its sensibility into American cinema. Crafted for only $275 American in her Los Angeles bungalow, this silent 14-minute film shows a woman coming home and slipping off into a midday reverie. What follows is a fragmented montage of uncanny dream sequences, a similar thing to what we can see in the first surrealism movies in chapter 1. There were repeated motifs of a cloaked figure with a mirror face. And hold your horses, because mirrors will be a very prominent factor in these surrealist works. A key in the mouth, a bread knife on the table, or a flower drifting on the pavement. These images cycle over and over again in a rhythmic, trance-like loop, if you will. Deren's heroine encounters multiple versions of herself in shifting rooms until her dream leads to an eruption of violence, which is her lifeless body shattering on a glass. Film scholars agree that Mashes of the Afternoon is a foundation of American avant-garde cinema. Its director even chose the name Maya from the Sanskrit for illusion, underlining how dream and reality blur in her work. As critic Odelia Vu observes, Deren's debut remains her unassailable magnum opus. Nicely said. Like, what? And is widely considered the most important film in the history of the American avant-garde. That's so cool. I love that. In its circular structure and surreal imaginary, Mashes riffs on Europe's surrealism. It pretty much echoes a lot of the same visions as Cafés and Dalí or L'Âge d'Or. Yet it also connects to Hollywood. Film historian J. Hoberman noted that Mashes felt surprisingly like Hollywood wartime film noir. His words, of course. Indeed, the moody shadows, subjective camera, and feverish pacing recall the era's noir thrillers, even as the content stays personal and symbolic. Deren herself saw Mashes as an exploration of the subconscious, which again connects to psychology so closely. It's just such a prominent factor in the whole genre of surrealism. Later, she wrote that the film reproduces the way in which the subconscious of an individual develops, interprets, and elaborates on an apparently simple and casual incident into a critical emotional experience. Her words. In other words, so it's more casual and more understandable, the film shows a thought spiraling into a nightmare. This psychological undercurrent, more interior than any linear film ever could be, was a novel for American screens. Mashes didn't reach big audiences in 1943, but its influence rippled through the underground. It just had a very big effect on it. Artists like, I don't know if I'm gonna be pronouncing the name right, Stan Brakhage, and even pop musician Kate Bush I love her. She was inspired by Deren for a music video. And they state that the movie is a touchstone, truly. It's looped imaginary of a woman chasing herself, the double staircase, the kaleidoscopic mirror, a mirror again. They all became iconic in the world of cinema. In short, Deren brought dream logic and symbolic montage into the US film art, stretching cinema toward surrealist territory, even before Hollywood could follow. Now we're gonna move to Cocteau and his poetic surrealism. Jean Cocteau pursued a parallel path to Deren, but in France, melding myth and surrealism into what critics called poetic cinema, which is just so nice to say, like poetic cinema. That sounds just so nice. So thought-provoking, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Cocteau never formally joined the Breton surrealists, but he made films that were dream-drenched and inventive. His famous Orphic trilogy, first was The Blood of a Poet, 1930, then Orpheus, 1950, and then The Testament of Orpheus in 1959, uses the Orpheus myth to blur reality with imagination. We love Criterion. Criterion Collection describes Cocteau's cinema as decadent, subversive, and bristling with artistic invention. Dreamlike works that disturb as much as they can charm. And I love that. It just sounds so amazing. In The Blood of a Poet, Cocteau's first film, the narrative is episodic and hallucinatory. We see a poet peering through keyholes into tableaux vivants, a child crawling up a wall, a firing squad whose victim springs back to life, or a couple writing notes to each other while locked in an embrace. What? These images play like moving surrealist paintings. Critics of the day instantly labeled it as a surrealistic film because it so strongly echoes of Buñuel and Dalí. And a little fact, André Breton, the surrealist leader, was so vexed by this label of Cocteau's work that Cocteau pretended to take offense at being called a surrealist, though he privately relished teasing Breton. In any case, The Blood of a Poet was a new kind of cinema experiment, and to quote Criterion again, one of cinema's great experiments, stretching the medium to its limits in pursuit of the artist's inner dreams. Cocteau took up film again 2 decades later with Orpheus, a metaphysical detective story of a poet drawn into a city of the dead through a magical mirror. A mirror, again. A mirror is like such a strong pattern. I personally view mirrors as a truly interesting thing. Okay, it's kind of sounds ironic. I have a mirror behind me, and I feel like it's a very surreal and eerie and scary thing. What do you mean you see a reflection of yourself and your world? And it's the same. I don't know, it's just, I get why they take it and use it as a staple and an important piece in the surreal filmography, because it really is weird and unreal even. Whatever, let's move on. Orpheus is often praised for its sly irony and stunning imaginary. The highway of flashing light becomes the underworld. A giant mirror's reflection literally releases souls. And Criterion has another thing to say about his work. It calls Orpheus visual poetry at the height of Cocteau's powers. That's nice. That's nice. Cocteau's later Testament of Orpheus in 1959 recapitulates and completes these themes. Together, the trilogy's dream logic makes myth modern, while Cocteau remains self-consciously a master of style. And Cocteau's films did actually make it into popular culture, because I feel like everyone knows Cocteau. When you say the name, everyone, well, not everyone, but many people are aware of that name, because he's a big person. Beauty and the Beast in 1946 was a lavish mainstream hit, though less surrealist than his Orphic works, obviously. Still, he showed how the surrealist eye could align with Hollywood craft. His camera tricks, slow motion, reverse motion, magic mirrors become part of cinema's growing toolbox. He made that popular. Truly. And Cocteau even wrote screenplays for other directors. Above all, Cocteau demonstrates a fusion of art and dream. His films ask us to accept poetry as reality, which is really great and really nice to think about. In the post-war period, that sensibility helped to bridge avant-garde art into the new cinema culture, especially among European authors who'd seen this blend of storybook romance and uncanny vision. Hitchcock and Dalí's dream sequence is our next part. Alfred Hitchcock was an émigré director, keenly attuned to the unconscious. By the mid-1940s, Hollywood audiences were ready for psychoanalysis on screen, and Freud has entered the zeitgeist amid post-war anxieties. Hitchcock seized this by making Spellbound, 1945, a noir thriller about a psychoanalyst and an amnesiac patient who may be a murderer. I'm not gonna say. Crucially, Spellbound hinges on dream interpretation, Freud, and Hitchcock famously brought Dalí on board to design the patient's nightmare. Later, Hitchcock explained his choice of choosing Dalí. He said, "What I was after was the vividness of dreams." He felt that film dreams should not be hazy or blurry, like cliches, but solid, very sharp, with very long perspectives and black shadows, just like Dalí's paintings. In fact, Hitchcock told an interviewer that he hired Dalí for the architectural sharpness of his work, so that the dream would have great visual clarity, great perspective, sharper than the film itself even, which is really cool to think about. And to me, it's really cool since dreams are truly not that hazy at all, usually, but more eerie and more vivid than a person would think of at first. They're clear and very, very sharp, just like real life, sometimes even sharper and more vivid and more pronounced than real life even. So it's great that the perspective on dreams shifted after this, thanks to Dalí and Hitchcock. What resulted is perhaps cinema's most famous dream sequence. A 2-minute montage of Dalí's surreal iconography. We see floating disembodied eyes dissolving into burning curtains, which is weird but absolutely amazing. Masked card players at an endless blackjack table, pair of giant scissors tearing a painted wall of ice, a tree roots bursting through a rooftop chimney to form a monstrous face. It was originally conceived to be a 20-minute film, but most of it was cut out to make it only into the 2 minutes. Regardless, Spellbound was a hit, and Dalí's signature was on it. Critics noted the collaboration. The New York Times said it as a rare film, and the New Yorker recommended, "You'd better see this one." So I'd say it was a success. In the scene, the patient lays on a couch and recalls, I don't know what sort of place it was. That's what he says. Dissolving into Dalí's visions. Through that flurry of bizarre imaginary, Hitchcock literally shows us the protagonist's subconscious. Hitchcock's use of dream symbolism didn't end with Spellbound. His later films often have subconscious echoes as well. In Vertigo, 1958, the dizzying spiral whirlpool of symbols, spirals, spiraling credits, the hallucination of the bell tower, plays like a walking dream of guilt and desire. Rebecca, 1940, famously opens with a voiceover saying, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again," which immediately sets a ghostly dream-like mood for the film. Even his static thrillers like Psycho and Notorious use surreal framing, the shower that induces a kind of primer nightmare, or the celebrated mirror dressing scene in Vertigo. All told, Hitchcock's work shows how surrealism entered classic Hollywood, not as chaos but as logic more. As he put it, all dreams in movies are blurred. It isn't true. Dalí was the best man to do the dreams because that's what dreams should be. They should be clear, they should be vivid, they should not be blurry and hazy. Now we'll talk noir melodrama, and the expanding subconscious. After the war, surrealist techniques grew rapidly, but quietly, in mainstream genres. Film noir and noirish melodramas, in particular, turned nightmares and fantasy into popular tropes. Noir heroes and anti-heroes often suffer cryptic visions and guilt-ridden dreams. As one scholar notes, 1940s and 50s noir fused subjective psychological points of view with experimentation from expressionism and surrealism. European emigres in Hollywood drew on expressionist traditions and surreal montages to inject horror and paranoia into crime dramas. By 1945, movies like Blind Alley, 1939, Stranger on the Third Floor, 1940, This Gun for Hire, 1942, and The Lost Weekend, 1945, often put psychoanalysis and mental instability at front and center. Hitchcock himself realized that audiences wanted the excitement of emotional disturbances and turmoil, and I think they so do. I think they still like that psychological horror rather than just horror, slasher, and jumpy scares. But maybe that's just me, maybe that's just my what company I'm keeping. For example, many classic noirs slide into fever dream sequences. In Stranger on the Third Floor, sometimes called the first noir film, the protagonist endures a famous nightmare trial. In Murder My Sweet, 1944, Raymond Chandler's detective collapses into a drugged fatigue and wakes into a surreal city street. The late 1940s wave of noir then featured all manner of nightmarish visions, swirling water in sinks, ghostly reflections, accusing faces in clouds or beer bubbles, and endless mirrors again. Production notes often called them montages, but critics understood their style. One review noted Noir's psychological montages revealing the central character's conflicted inner psyche. That's a mouthful. But this blending didn't stop at noir. Melodramas and thrillers also flirted with the uncanny. Alfred Hitchcock's female Gothic run, Rebecca Suspicion, Shadow of a Doubt, loaded ordinary settings with dreamlike suspense. It was observed that Hitchcock's work depicted psychology, dreams, and nightmares in striking visuals. Notorious, 1946, used inky shadows and a chilling staircase that feels like falling into a nightmare. Even studio musicals and fantasy films took a hint. 1940s dance numbers sometimes dissolved into abstract patterns as well. So the whole artwork basically took a hit of surrealism. Importantly, this was a cultural shift. The very idea of the subconscious had become popular now. By the 1950s, Freud and Jung were suspects of general conversation. Psychotherapy was no longer taboo. Hollywood heroes openly said they had nightmares or childhood trauma. Surrealism's hallmark, turning ordinary objects into uncanny symbols, now felt natural on any screen, and anything random like a lipstick could symbolize a ruin. Over time, surrealist style in Hollywood became subdued and integrated. We stopped seeing literal melting clocks, and we find their spirit uncanny coincidences, disorienting edits, and symbols planted for the viewer. By the 1960s, surrealism was no longer a foreign import, but a built-in language. Film grammar included dissolves, superimpositions, and montages, not just for spectacle, but to examine a character's interior world. And for the conclusion, the post-war era, surrealism has gone public. What began as a rebellious art movement among bohemians became an invisible current running through Hollywood's biggest genres. The artists showed that film can be poetry, that the mainstream imagination absorbed the subconscious as well, making dreams and symbols part of everyday storytelling. And I'm so thankful for that. But it was a cultural transformation as well, as I already said. Today, when we see someone cutting between reality and dream on screen, when shadows creep like living monsters or familiar objects take on a sinister meaning, we're witnessing the legacy of surrealism's grand experiment, and it doesn't even seem unreal or crazy or unnatural at all. By bleeding into Hollywood's visual language, surrealism ensured that our films, from film school art pieces to summer blockbusters, keep one eye open on reality and one on the dreamscape. As we move forward, we'll see how this dreaminess shapes even later directors and genres. But for now, in chapter 2, we see how surrealism ceased to just be a secret conversation among radicals and instead whispered across the silver screen of millions of viewers to see. And that's all for me today. Thank you for tuning in and hanging out. I hope you found this video entertaining and interesting. I really love talking about this topic, so I'm excited for chapter 3. And if you like this content, you can check out my channel further, and you can also check out my Spotify podcast called Whatever Happens. As always, if you like this, leave a comment, leave a like. I also wanted to point out that this video, though it has not that many visuals and stuff, I believe that this is my style, and I like to have this more as a video essay and not exactly just a video to look at, but also to listen to. So maybe I'll integrate more visuals and more videos into it, but so far this is what I like doing and this is my style now. So I hope you like it, and if you do, leave a comment, subscribe, leave a like, whatever tickles your pickle. You know what I mean? Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.